When we see the development of both India and China over the last 20 years or so, right, in many ways they're leapfrogging their Western counterparts. Do you see the India AI landscape evolving? Do you think that we're missing something from your perspective?
There's a lot of Indians which are involved in the development side of things. Obviously, we're way behind in terms of resources. Typically, the India AI story is trying to solve Indian consumer problems, which is predominantly non-English. From a data perspective, we don't have enough data or available data which can be used for training our own models, which are, let's say, predominantly in regional languages, kind of have that understanding of those nuances. And there's a lot of complexity, right? But if you have to build a native LLM with India-focused problem in mind, it's a lot of resources, right? And India's not ready yet to invest that kind of money.
You might get a call where an insurance agent, voice agent is calling you and saying, हमें कुछ औपचारिकताएं संपूर्ण करनी है. And nobody really talks like that. We say formalities complete करनी है, right? So that difference of how language is used versus formally how it's supposed to be used. And if you switch to Hindi, you speak completely in Hindi, but that doesn't really doesn't really translate to how we talk in everyday language, right? And that's part of the problem.
Yeah, and that's the data I was saying which is kind of sparse, right? Like actually getting those call data, which is Indian customers or English customer, for instance, talking to a call center. You need that data to train on to kind of learn that to be able to converse like that, right? Which is missing. I think one thing that is very clear in today's world, everybody understands that AI is here to stay.
So, good morning, Prateek.
Good morning.
I'm so happy to sit down in this format. We've obviously known each other for, God, I don't know how many
20 years now.
20 years, a little bit more maybe.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know Prateek, other than being a long-time friend, is one of the most accomplished guys in the field of AI in India. Let's go back all the way at the start. So Prateek was the board topper for UP board in our batch. He was, he was at BITS Pilani, chief troublemaker within our gang at BITS Pilani. Worked across the globe in the US, in the UK, different parts of the world. Founded quite romantically. There's a story behind this. Quite romantically, just while you were on a drive in Scotland.
Yeah.
You just stopped and said, you know what, I'm going to start my own company. And then you came back to India and started what was then Couture, which is now CAI Stack. So founder and CEO of CAI Stack, built several AI tools. You famously told me that you've been doing AI longer than ChatGPT has been around, and
Definitely.
you've built LLMs long before they were popularized. And you work with some of the most celebrated companies and brands of the country.
Yes.
Bringing that AI capability to them.
Definitely.
Which I think there's an interesting story there. From my perspective, they are the famous lines from the 1834 poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He said, water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. And I think in many ways, for me, AI is a bit like that. At a consumer level, everybody has used ChatGPT, has worked with some form of generative AI in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Yet, if you look at corporate applications, it's not quite the same level. If I still call my telephone provider, I'm still stuck on a 34-minute wait before I can get anything meaningful done. So, looking in from the outside, it seems like AI quite hasn't been adopted in solving real customer problems. So, is your perspective any different?
So I wouldn't say that it's not quite adopted, but there are obviously challenges and which are being solved in different ways over the years, right? And if you look from different kind of use cases that have been done using AI and generative AI in particular, it has gone from assistants to agents to now trying to do more autonomous controls and things like that, right? The biggest challenge is obviously access to data and having a governance framework where the privacy is maintained, data is not leaked for bad actors and things like that. So especially for larger organizations and enterprises with lots of customer data, the the security becomes paramount, the governance becomes paramount. So that's where the challenges are. And as the newer models and newer architectures keep coming in, it's always difficult to kind of keep up with ensuring that framework is maintained. Obviously, when somebody is training a model, they're not thinking about the best way to protect data per se, or how enterprise interests are taken control, right? So that is one aspect which is kind of always a slowing factor in terms of adoption, but there's a lot of effort being done in that domain. Companies like us, we are working towards solving some of those problems.
So that's an interesting perspective. So you're essentially saying that it's not low adoption, it's slow adoption.
It's definitely slow adoption, yes.
Got it. And the factor for that is we're just making our checks and balances. So I think the analogy is you don't publicize a vaccine for COVID the moment you find it. You first have to go through your checks and balances to make sure it doesn't have any negative effects down the line, and you're making sure you put all of that in place. And that's what is driving some of the perhaps slower adoption in more evolved frameworks and use cases, right? The ones that have been around for decades or maybe even centuries, like banking, like retail, like public infrastructure. That's why we're not seeing some of that just pop out of at us right away.
Yeah, so there are two aspects of it, right? So one is, in general, the technology not being there in terms of having those well defined, right? The other is the education in the people as well, right? So people understanding those technology and then being able to handle those situations, right? So data scientists have obviously moved on. They have learned how to use LLMs or how to build LLMs in that sense, right? But the IT teams have not. The security teams have not. So they are also catching up and slowly kind of adopting, understanding. There are challenges coming in terms of new kinds of attacks happening on the organization. So those teams are kind of still behind, and they are learning how to understand these attacks and then learn to solve those problems. So that's the bigger aspects of the problem as well. Obviously, like particularly if you look at global geography, so there are so US is obviously much ahead in terms of building the technology as well and adoption of the technology. China is obviously probably closer second. And somewhere China is saying, I will beat you as well, and they are more advanced than you as well. Yeah. India is obviously kind of catching up. So there's a big challenge in terms of people knowing the technology and learning, and how do I act, like not enough resources to kind of build something, let's say as equivalent to ChatGPT. So those are again catching up game which are being played by different countries, and getting people to be educated in those technologies, learning those, and then coming to a point where they can actually start implementing and taking it to consumer.
Yeah, and I think the acuteness of the problem is demonstrated in the recent news of the $100 million bonus payouts that Meta has made to ex-OpenAI employees. And I mean, that sort of tells you that there is a true dearth or shortage of top-tier AI talent. It's one thing to be able to use ChatGPT as a wrapper, write your own API usage for it, but it's quite another to build another equivalent from the scratch, from the ground up. And that's what you're talking about, is talent that can actually understand, not just use, but truly understand the inner workings of these generative AI models.
Yeah, so there's definitely talent which understands that, but obviously there's a very shortage of it. There's not many people around the world who knows that, and that's why the talent war, as you're saying. And I mean, it goes back to, so when I moved back to India back in 2015, right? I think, and we used to tell people that, yeah, this is like the new thing which will hit the world soon, and everyone should start learning about it. So we went to colleges, we went to IIT Bombay, BITS and triple ITs and all of them. And we trying to make some partnership to get colleges adopt those firsthand, so that the research starts happening in those domains. The students start getting accustomed to those knowledge bases, right? And we were much late, right? We were actually, ChatGPT was a moment when the world started realizing, yeah, AI is a real thing. And that's when the momentum shifted in terms of learning. So now it's kind of a catching up game. Right. So there's a huge gap in talent, because obviously the infrastructure in terms of educational institutes and a lot of things are not in place to support that, which is kind of slowly now coming towards it. And but because the world has moved on very quickly, we are kind of catching up. So there are very few people across the world who understand those architectures, those systems which are required to train such a large model. And obviously, when you have shortage of supply, there's a crazy talent war in terms of $100 million as Meta is offering. And I think some sort of similar thing is happening in India as well. So there are people who are very sought after, and then there's a long tail which is kind of trying to find their position.
So let me ask you this. You brought up an interesting perspective. I'm curious to understand from your vantage point, do you think that the people who truly understand AI are AI native, AI first, or are these people who have seen the journey from the, I wouldn't say non-AI, but non-generative AI, let's say days from back when we just started our careers, right? To today, when, with models can not just generate text, they can generate videos and images and all modalities, right? Do you think that people who've seen the journey, the evolution, are more advantaged in terms of understanding the nuances of and the workings of AI? Or do you think people who were just born into this era, just started their careers, are actually better off? I mean, I draw a lot of analogies. I see, our kids, for example, they didn't grow up in the writing era. We had the muscle of the pick up the pencil and write, right?
Yeah.
Our kids are, touch interface savvy, they're typing savvy, but they're not as savvy with the writing and using the pen and the pencil, right? So that is a dying skill. Over time, that'll die out, right? And other than signatures, you and I don't pick up the pen as often that we used to, right? So similarly, the evolution of computer science, we're both computer science people, right? So from that to now understanding AI, do you think there's advantage in knowing the history and seeing the history, or do you think people who started now are better off?
So experience definitely matters, right? So that's always the case. But I mean, a good analogy for writing is coding today. A lot of new coders which are coming, they are not actually writing the code. They're using cursors and other tools of the world to generate code and kind of start from there. Now, this definitely a huge experience kind of helps in terms of when you have seen those in production live use cases, nuances which are coming at a scale when lots of people are using it. That's very different than kind of creating a prototype in a day using a tool out there, right? So that definitely makes a huge difference when you have to build something sustainable which can be scaled. But at the same time, there has to be a balance where you're open to adopting newer technology, right? So if everyone is like writing good code using the code generators out there, and you're still writing the traditional code, you would be slower in some areas. Obviously, there are certain areas where your expertise will kick in. But any kind of bootstrapped code, you should be looking at using the tools to generate code, right? So that for people like us who have been in this domain for many years, we've seen those use cases go live and handle those millions of users accessing those systems. Obviously, that experience helps, right? It's much better than somebody trying to vibe code an app and deploying it and then going crazy when the actual load hits the production.
But the fundamental point there is it's a completely different skill set. Again, to use a very different analogy, it's a bit like when you and I are old enough to see the advent of T20 cricket. We saw the first T20 game ever played. We saw the first World Cup. It's a very different skill set than the 200 odd years of Test cricket and maybe some a few years of ODI cricket, right? When some of these skills come in for the first time, and again, experience is in short supply just because the tool hasn't existed. So Cursor itself has not been in the world for more than 5 years. So in that sense, for you to be a Cursor coder, you couldn't have more than 5 years of experience, right? So experience being a regular coder, having the openness to adopt to a new way of working and translating your previous experience into this new world where you're not writing code, but operating a model that writes code for you.
Yeah.
That's the whole game here. So it's not just having that experience, but being able to translate into almost a different sport, like with the T20 example.
Yeah, so it's still, I mean, so going back to college days, right? Like, what did we learn in computer science? I mean, nobody taught us how to code per se, right? They taught us how to design, how to architect, how to relate it with actual real problem.
Right.
And that is something you still have to learn, right? It's not something which a vibe coding can do for you. I mean, it would, but it won't be matching to what you want to achieve.
So that's the more technical way of approaching it. To stick with my T20 analogy, the importance of good defense, the importance of a good posture, the importance of a good position that you can get into, picking the ball early, picking the line and length, all of that will still stay.
Definitely.
But if you look at modern T20 batters, they're wired differently, right? So they think attack first, whereas a test cricketer thinks defense first, right? And that's the difference. That's the analogy that I'm using to say, if you look at a traditional coder, they think breaking the problem down. They think, they might approach it a different way, versus somebody who's a vibe coder who knows the basics of coding. And we're not sort of trivializing the importance of knowing the basics of it. But at the same time, they look at, what are the possible issues? What is the speed factor? How can I iterate faster? How can I build a basic MVP or minimum lovable product, as they call it these days, and then iterate on it using my vibe coding skills, right? So it's a very different skill set. It's still, the importance of the basics are not lost, but it's a very different skill set, right?
It definitely is. Again, that's what the balance comes into play, right? So it's always, and in all my years of working with different AI stacks, right? Experimentation were always a bit easier. Like, so you could quickly take a small data, do something on it, or quickly build a prototype where you can showcase that, this is how AI would look like, or it will solve the problem. But getting that to scale and getting that to a level where actual users are using it, and there are different kind of challenges, right? So getting to that, what we call feature completeness and security aspects of it, governance aspect of it, right? Those things are something which still you need that traditional know-how and knowledge to kind of handle those, right? That's not coming out of box from a vibe coding application. I mean, some of it is, and people are kind of getting better and better as we go along. But it'll take some time to kind of get to a point where you can actually, let's say, deploy a banking app which is vibe coded. It's just not possible today, right?
Fair enough.
And that's where you need products which can kind of bridge those gaps between quick coding and having the systems in place which kind of stop proliferation of all these security issues coming into your code and things like that. So that's where I think the balance is, right? Versus obviously if you're doing some experimentation, you're trying to do MVPs or quick go-to market, those kind of things you can always try out and get a validation for your product using these. And over time, I think there will be a balance where, so for example, I'll take my team, right? So, and my entire team has been working in this stack for many years now, right? So they're not looking for cursors or Lovable to kind of quickly start building application, obviously, because they already have a lot of things which are ready to available, ready to use kind of thing. But they still use it to, for instance, write test cases or edge case like testing and those kind of things, which is time consuming and bootstrapped in some sense. So there is a balance in terms of what you use for fast tracking your development cycle versus completely being dependent on a tool to kind of build your entire infrastructure.
Understood. So in terms of going back to that education factor and how hard it is, and the challenge of hiring AI talent in India, abroad as well, is that what is driving decision making from the perspective of large organizations in terms of whether they build something, they buy something? And a related question to that is, do you think that smaller, more nimble organizations are advantaged compared to larger incumbents in terms of adopting AI in the context of build versus buy? So do you see buy winning compared to build for that reason? I mean, I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Definitely yes, right now, and even in the current market. But see, from a larger organization perspective, what happens is, so first thing is the intent, right? Like, is the organization ready to experiment with a new technology or kind of adopt AI for instance, right? There are some which are ahead in that. Like they had the intent to adopt, they had the intent to quickly bring in and make that their competitive advantage to some extent. But then the large organizations have their own challenges in terms of rallying people around that. There are people who are still stuck with some of the older technologies. They don't want to learn newer things. Then there are issues, different departments, BUs, which were kind of competing with each other. So a lot of enterprisey things that happens, right? And I'm sure both of us have worked in large organizations, so we have seen those firsthand.
Yeah.
Startups and smaller companies obviously have that bit centralized and easy to solve because there's a small number of people and kind of they get that nimbleness from that. But then they are low on resources when it comes to, let's say, if you have to train, like throw a lot of GPUs to train a model, you're kind of dependent on external fundings and things like that. So from what I've seen is there's a shift in terms of like 5 years back, enterprises were very, very, they wanted to build in-house because they wanted to control the IP. After a point, they realize it's just not possible. The world is moving so fast that they can't catch up to those advancements in the models and technologies and so on and so forth, right? So they still want to hold the IP in terms of what they're taking to the customers, but they are open to take infrastructure models, infrastructure solutions, and governance solutions, and so on and so forth to fast track that cycle. I think one thing that is very clear in today's world, everybody understands that AI is here to stay. It's not like a word that people are just throwing around. So they are open to that adoption, and then they're trying to now bridge how quickly can they be ready and they kind of adopt and make it available to their customers. So they're kind of out of that build race anyways. They are kind of they're trying to bridge today. So definitely there is a need for buy now. Now there also again there's challenges. Most of the GPT providers, for example, like OpenAI or Vertex or Azure, they're cloud based. So again the question comes: how do I secure my data? How do I protect my data? And so we work with banks, we work with retailers. Some of the banks that we worked with, they're scared that if Google has all my data, then what moat I'm left with, right? They can tomorrow go out.
Just turn and launch a bank tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I was surprised, like, okay, are you like, as being one of the biggest bank, you're worried that Google will come and eat my business?
Yeah.
So that factor will always be there in enterprises. They will want to protect their data. They would want to protect their business, which is fair. And now, so there is a requirement for products which can come in and kind of play a bridging game on how the latest technology can be adopted and in a more secure, efficient way. So that's where I think the world is today. We're trying to figure out how do we solve that.
That's actually quite ironic. I remember you and I were in the US around 2010-11 when the first wave of SaaS and the movement to the cloud was starting, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you would see so much resistance from organizations in terms of adopting the cloud. They were worried that their data would go on the cloud. And within a few years, that became the norm and everybody's on the cloud. And now what you're saying is we're going back to on-premise in some ways for AI models because that concern is resurfacing, right?
Correct.
It's quite interesting that evolution is happening. And I see that myself in my circles as well, that, okay, it's one thing to have an AI wrapper and do it for an external function, but something that's core to my business, I don't want to have, especially with PII data, with my customers' data involved. I don't want to risk data being sent off to somewhere where I have no control on it, or it could potentially be leveraged against me to build a competitive offering. So I see that happening quite a lot. Is that also, I think, even more severe because of the fact that most AI, at least in my observation, is essentially OpenAI wrappers? Most of the people that are talking about AI are just using APIs and just building wrappers around some of these big 3, big 4 AI providers, whereas no real built from the ground up AI is really being, alternatives are really out there. Is that your perception as well?
Yeah, I think majority of them are. I think, and there's a lot of text being written around what are the challenge of doing something like that, right? I saw one of the posts recently where somebody had built their entire stack on one of these APIs, and suddenly the pricing changed and their entire business model went out the window.
Right.
So those challenges are always there. But see, again, I mean, it's a matter of the effort that it takes to build something ground up, right? That's much more, and then you have to have that competitive advantage of competing with some of these APIs. So, for
Correct.
example, you're building a call intelligence solution where you're kind of analyzing voice and transcribing it, for example. 2-3 years back, it was like everyone was building their own models because that was your IP, that was your moat, how better you are compared to the market, right? Now it's fairly standardized, as open source option available, which you can use and build upon. So that becomes lesser, or rather it's easier for people to kind of adopt that and go to market quickly. And then maybe over the years, build your moat over the data that you have and kind of better the base model using the data that you have. So that kind of positioning is there for anything when you're doing core modeling or and some of the things which we do with our customers, right? So we use a lot of open source technologies. We use GPTs for experimentation phases where we have to prove that how this will work or whether the value will be there or not, right? But when we go towards scale, obviously we have option to host the models in-house, build or fine-tune models in-house, and then scale with the data that we have or the enterprises have to kind of build IP for them. So that's kind of the cycle how it goes, right? So you start with quick experimentation, and there you're fairly open to use anything which is available in the market to kind of see the value proposition. But then you need to spend a lot of money in terms of building that moat, building that IP, which becomes your competitive advantage compared to anybody else who is coming and trying to build something similar on an API which is available, right? So,
but there isn't there, like you alluded to, there is a risk of things moving so fast, right? I mean, how long back were we when we just started with GPTs and all of a sudden we heard RAG is the new in thing, and retrieval augmented generation, for those of you that are not familiar with the term. And RAG was all the rage, and I feel like it was just a matter of months before RAG gave into agentic workflows, and now we're hearing all about MCP servers, and it's hard to keep up. And I mean, a company would be fair to think, let me just sit this out and let the dust settle down on this, and then I'll jump in, right? Because it's just evolving so rapidly that it's not possible for me to be on top of these AI trends. I cannot master them. Let this ride out, the wave ride out, get to a point where we've got one winner, and then we go all in. Is that a fair line of thinking, or do you not agree with that?
So I don't actually. So it's pretty interesting, right? So as you mentioned earlier, we predate ChatGPT, right? So we have been working with GPTs, for instance, much before ChatGPT was a thing, right? Like large models, transformer-based models, and so on and so forth. So in some way, architecturally, we had solved what RAG was, right? Obviously, that was not a well-documented term back like before 2 years before ChatGPT.
And we here is your company.
Yeah, we as a company, and I'm sure there are people, some people across the world who would have done similar things. But yeah, as a company, we had solved or we had worked on problems which were similar to RAG 2 years before ChatGPT was a thing, right? Similarly, architecturally, because we have worked with enterprise data, we've been working with different stacks, SAP systems, and all the enterprise systems out there, right? We had servers which were handling or giving access to enterprise data to our own protocol for that matter, right? Now, over the years, what has happened is these patterns have become more standardized, and then there is somebody who came up and gave a name to it, right? And that became an authority in saying, okay, this is how we are going to do things. So the moments that you're seeing like terms becoming more famous and people kind of talking about it, and then suddenly everybody creating a like complete rage around it, it's more people who are learning and kind of adopting it for the first time, right? Like people like us who have been in this domain for many years, not a lot of have changed. Like the way you interact with the transformer based models is kind of same. The way you access enterprise data is kind of same. Obviously, having standards helps in quicker adoption. So having an MCP protocol helps us to explain to our customers this is how it's going to be, right? And this is not something I am telling you to do. This is a standard which is adopted worldwide. Right. So they are also like open to understand and kind of quickly adopt that. 5 years back, we had to kind of literally sit with the architects of these companies and explain them, see, this is what it means, this is how things will work, this is how we will handle these edge cases, and so on and so forth. So that is much more streamlined today with agentic framework being in place and MCP servers being in place. But at a high level, I think we're kind of, I mean, there's only few ways you can solve a problem, right? So that is, and it's the names will change. Like you'll have new names coming for some of the new things. Terminology will change. Maybe slight nuances in how things are done, but ultimately you're trying to solve the same problem: get access to the enterprise data, make it available in some usable format to your customers, and then solve a customer problem. So that's the goal. Eventually, the AI has to solve.
So I guess what you're also saying here is that working with a company like yours is in effect de-risking it for the larger organizations that don't want to ride out with that wave or don't have the ability to sort of keep up with the latest in the AI world. And so working with a company like yours who's always on top because this is your bread and butter, this is your primary job, de-risks that and also speeds up the entire process for them. Is that how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, definitely. So again, the challenges are more, so when you're doing it in-house, for instance, right, there's a lot of experimentation, especially because the landscape is changing so rapidly that there's new technologies or new keywords, as you said, coming up almost every day. There's new versions, there's new models which are coming up. There are new tooling which is coming up almost every day. So obviously you have to catch up in terms of knowledge, and then you have to catch up in terms of understanding of the technology, how you have to try it out, you have to ensure the shortcomings are known, and so on and so forth. And doesn't make sense that everybody investing the same amount of effort in doing all of that, right? We as a company are known for doing that and being up at the forefront of that stack. So for enterprises, larger enterprises, it helps to kind of quickly partner with us, understand what's happening, and then fast track their own journey of adopting something new. And as they have solutions which are in production, which needs to constantly reviewed and kind of revamped sometimes, RAG, for example, right? So there's a lot of changes which has happened in how the RAGs were built in terms of memory, context, and things like that coming into picture. So those, it's not just going to production, it's also keeping up with the technology to ensure your live solutions are also up to date and meeting the standards of the market. So that's where we play a very important role in terms of ensuring that we are always working on latest and greatest. We have the support for almost all models which come to market, almost like a day zero support for all models that come to market. We keep track of all the new things happening in the transformer world or AGI world, and we trying to always find a balance how that can be adopted in the enterprise space.
And you've done that quite successfully with some of the biggest names in both in India as well as globally. You've worked with retail giants like Reliance across their portfolio companies. You worked with some of the major banking and financial institutions around the world, in the US, in the Middle East, as well as in India. Your experience is that this model works, right? This model of, whilst you are a huge incumbent company that's focused in your industry and your space, we are the ones who take on the baton of the AI expertise, and we're the ones who are effectively advising these companies in how to deploy and how to get value out of these AI solutions.
Yeah, definitely. So as I said, right, so it also ties back to the talent shortage as there, right? So there are only few people who can actually play that role across the world. And I mean, not just us, right? There are obviously many companies who have that positioning, but it's getting difficult for enterprises to hire talent who have seen that journey, who have learned the nuances and things like that. So it kind of helps them, or from the value add perspective, right? So that's where any deal is like, people are looking at what value you bring to the table.
Right.
So our value is not just in terms of know of the technology; it's also in terms of seeing that scale, seeing that production grade quality that very few have seen in the world. So that's the clear advantage that we have, and that's what kind of helps us in some of the conversions that we have.
And Prateek, do you see this interest more on the inbound side? I mean, you're getting a lot of companies that are reaching out with interest on, I want to solve this problem. You guys are clearly the experts. Can you help? Or do you think that there's an element of you have to help them with the realization of, hey, look, AI can do this a lot better, faster, cheaper for your business. So you should consider AI as a way of doing this business process or solving this problem, right? So is it more companies have a problem and they come to you and can you help me with AI? Or is it you have to go to them and say, hey, this can be done better with AI? Or is it a mix of both?
So actually, interestingly, in recent years, it's other way around. So it's people are aware that they want to adopt AI, and they're already reading about how AI can solve their problems, so on and so forth. They're coming to us for the expertise and the know-how of the systems, right? So at least we don't have to go educate them that you should be using AI to solve this problem. That a lot of companies and the leadership in these companies, they are aware of, and they have educated themselves on. But there's a clear lack of people who have the executional capability or the expertise in executing a project like that. And that's where I think we get a lot of inbound, and most of our customers are actually like that.
And so one of the things that you guys do is what you call AI middleware, which is effectively AI guided or AI orchestrated management of infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it is helping some of your clients, and how do they leverage it, get value from it?
Right. So the idea of AI middleware is basically to build a governance layer which controls the infrastructure in an autonomous way, right? So the challenge that most of these agentic frameworks and the new age GPT-based systems have is there's no control over how the customer is using it, how the scalability happens. It's fairly open to like production interpretation and all, right? So, and as I said, so from an enterprise perspective, the biggest challenge they have is security, governance, data privacy controls, and things like that, right? So what we have done is we have built a product which we call an autonomous AI middleware. It lets completely controls how the applications get deployed, how the agents get deployed, when do they wake up, when do they sleep, so on and so forth. And at the same time, manage the resources which are needed for these agents to perform their job, right? There's a big cost angle to it because you don't want your systems to be available all the time or your agents to be available all the time. That's where AI middleware comes in and kind of controls the entire life cycle of agentic journey and ensures that they have the resources required for when do they need it. So, and we have seen almost 70% cost savings in terms of infrastructure spends, because we're using a lot of GPU, which is kind of getting wasted when there is no customer or no load as such, but you still have to keep them alive. So that's the layer we kind of solving with this product. And we have seen that working well for larger companies because they come to solving this problem later in the stage. So they start experimenting, have a solution built, and then they realize they have a big problem to solve because whatever you have built is not going to scale for 100 million users, for instance, right? So versus our approach is different. So we start with the middleware approach and then we build on top of it. So you're always aware of how things will scale and where the cost will be. And so then it's a much clearer business value proposition in that sense.
I think the cost element is becoming more front and center in some of the conversations I'm having with people. Yes, AI adoption is priority, but they're also becoming increasingly aware of how expensive it is to run AI models. And that's where I think, I mean, this almost becomes like a no-brainer, right?
Yes.
Leveraging a smart way. You are going to have that infrastructure need. How can you be smarter about saving costs and deploying it and orchestrating it when required and going higher or lower depending on when your load is higher or when your users are hitting your
Yes.
app, or etc. Right?
Yeah. So it's actually widespread, right? So one is obviously your GPT cost, and other is, so I was reading an article, somebody was mentioning they bought Cursor's license for their team, and generally for the pro version they give like 500 credits and things like that. And one of the developer used it in a day.
Yeah.
So it's like a yearly license that they bought, and somebody just finished it in a day.
Right.
So that's becoming a very common problem for a lot of companies that we're talking to, right? A lot of people or a lot of developers who are adopting AI, but then there is no control over who is using it how, and is it actually required for the job somebody is doing, versus some sense of governance and control that companies can have over how AI is adopted within their organization. And that's where a product like Middleware comes in, because that gives those controls to the CIOs and the CTOs in terms of having a view over what's actually happening across the organization, how the AI is utilized and kind of fairly adopted across the organization, and then controls over cost, control over usage policies, fair usage policies, and things like that. So that's a big aspect of what we're trying to solve.
But this is not just for AI projects. It can be leveraged with any amount of any kind of infrastructure that's being used today. So, if a company is looking to jump into AI, this might be a good entry into that world, because you're also simplifying the ease of adoption, deploying models, managing the whole thing, right? So it's not just okay, I got to start thinking about infrastructure and costs once I have built up and scaled up my AI practice within my company. It's I need this to even build and scale the AI practice within my company. Is that accurate?
Definitely, yes. Yeah. So, and a lot of AI initiatives fail, right? And I mean, there's a lot of study that Deloitte has done, and a lot of Big Fours have done, where there's a quote saying 90% of AI initiatives fail. One of the biggest reason was that people realize the cost when they actually hit that scale.
Right.
They don't understand it when they start building it, right?
Right.
So it's imperative that they start looking at it at the start of planning aspect of it, right? Like how it will scale for your millions of users out there. What kind of infrastructure spend will be required, what kind of GPT usage will be required. So those, the more earlier you do those analysis, it's better in terms of value proposition that you're going to get. And that's where looking at a product like Middleware helps, because it gives you a sense of what it requires to actually scale in production, not just build a prototype for a local usage.
Prateek, let's change gears. I think a question that's on top of a lot of our minds as Indians is, India doesn't have an AI story. I mean, obviously we don't have our own homegrown AI model like DeepSeek for China, or like some of these other models for America. A lot of Indians are involved in the AI race with Perplexity and some of the other companies that you and I have seen. That doesn't really benefit the country. I mean, some of these models, like I see VO3 is still not available in India. India is one of the last countries to get the advantages of some of these models being launched. It doesn't reach us in the first go. Do you see the India AI landscape evolving? Do you think that we're missing something from your perspective?
So we're catching up, I guess. As you said, right? Like, there's a lot of Indians which are involved in the development side of things. But obviously we are way behind in terms of resources, right? So typically the India AI story is trying to solve Indian consumer problems, which is predominantly non-English, right? So, and from a data perspective, we don't have enough data or available data which can be used for training our own models, which are, let's say, predominantly in regional languages, kind of have that understanding of those nuances. And there's a lot of nuances, right? Over the years, it has become like some 7-8 major languages that India has that the models have started becoming better at it, because those data are kind of slowly being opened up for the models to consume. But if you have to build a native LLM with India-focused problem in mind, it's a lot of resources, right? And India is not ready yet to invest that kind of a money.
So are you saying, so it's a little counterintuitive, because with a population of 1.4 billion and with the amount of internet consumption and overall usage that we see in India, you would assume that India would have a lot of data, but you're saying it's not enough data. Is that because we're divided along language lines? Is that part of the problem here?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, 1.4 billion is the entire country, right?
Yeah.
And then I don't know how many official languages we have, but I think it's like in 50s or something. And
but if you take, for example, the most popular languages, if you go by the number of speakers that speak the language, then Hindi, Urdu, Bengali would be your highest and most popular languages in not even just in India, but globally after English, Mandarin, and Spanish, right? Do you think that there's also an element that it's not just a translation or direct translation problem, but it's also that our language is actually a mix of a bunch of different things? Like when you and I speak, we don't really speak Hindi or English, we speak Hinglish, right? We'll throw a bunch of English words mixed in with Hindi words, and there'll be a few references that'll be from Marathi, because we spend a lot of time around Mumbai. There'll be a few references from, so it's not really a pure play translation problem. It's actually India just operates very differently from the rest of the world.
Yeah, and so it's I won't say it's just an India problem. It's a lot of multilingual countries, right? So Middle East, Southeast Asia. If you go to, like, typically they are bilingual, like they will have English as a primary language, and then they'll have a local language, which is the main language that they use, right? India obviously is much more diverse and it's more nuances, because you have, every region has its own, right? So beyond Hindi, Urdu, Bangla, you have Gujarati, Marathi, Kannada, Tamil, so on, right?
Yeah.
So those, and almost everywhere you have like Hinglish kind of a construct where people are speaking two languages at a time. So the problem that you're solving from an LLM perspective is not just a translation or a knowing the intent kind of a problem. It's more of
how people speak
and kind of how do you map that to what is actually required as an outcome, right? So that becomes a bit more nuanced, and that's why the solution is more India centric or the country centric, rather than building a general purpose LLM and then trying to solve a problem. Right?
And we've seen this with voice bots that you and I, we've gotten, calls over the last few months where an AI calling, and they're trying to speak Hindi, but the Hindi they speak is too formal.
Yeah.
So if I can switch to Hindi for a few seconds, you might get a call where an insurance agent, voice agent is calling you and saying, हमें कुछ औपचारिकताएं संपूर्ण करनी है. And nobody really talks like that. We say formalities complete करनी है, right? So that difference of how language is used versus formally how it's supposed to be used. And if you switch to Hindi, you speak completely in Hindi, but that doesn't really doesn't really translate to how we talk in everyday language, right? And that's part of the problem.
Yeah. So, and that's the data I was saying which is kind of sparse, right? Like actually getting those call data, which is Indian customers or English customer, for instance, talking to a call center. You need that data to train on to kind of learn that, to be able to converse like that, right? Which is missing. And it will take a lot of time to kind of get that kind of an access for all the regional languages and get that scale. So one aspect is kind of missing that data, and the second is the resources required to use that data and then kind of train something specific to that region and kind of scale it for that region, right? So monetarily it has to make sense, where the investment that goes into it is returned in terms of like, let's say if we have a company like ChatGPT in India, it would require that kind of a return to compete with ChatGPTs globally, right?
Right.
That's where there's a lack of resources, I would say, where
And perhaps the lack of demand also driving it, because the rest of the world is adopting ChatGPT.
Yes, yeah.
So only for the use cases where we are so dramatically different that the OpenAI APIs or any other competitor doesn't work for us. And one great example of that is self-driving in India, right?
Yes.
I don't know, some of you might have seen the -1 video where they're launching a self-driving car in India, in the streets of India, with all the noise and the chaos that we've known Indian roads for. It's a very different problem than the autopilot on Tesla, right? It's almost like a completely different game that we're playing, right? So having a model there makes a lot of sense, because I think that problem probably translates to a Thailand and a Vietnam and a Cambodia and a bunch of other markets around the world, except for the Western world, where there is general coherence in how traffic is managed and generally people following the rules. Here, it's all over the place, right? So a self-driving car built for India from the ground up would be a very good idea.
Again, so it's also a matter of prioritization, I would say, right? So as a country, I think we are trying to solve too many things in parallel and kind of trying to, like, for instance, Aadhaar or UPI, right? We have done a really great job. We're probably ahead of the world in some of those aspects. But before you build, let's say, a good banking system, you need those bases to kind of get that inclusion, get that scale. I think same thing will go for a self-driving car, right? I mean, do we have a unified driving license system? We don't. We have very sparse state-wise implementations and things like that, right?
Right.
So it's trying to solve a lot of problems at once. It's not just a problem of having a car which can understand traffic better, but it's also having a compliance framework in place. If there is something wrong with that self-driving, who do you go after? How do you ensure there is people taking responsibility, accountability for it?
Yeah.
So those aspects also come into picture. So see, not everyone needs everything at the same time, right? There is some people, like the need in US might be self-driving cars.
Yeah.
In India, it might be something different. Might be better electric car framework, right? So, and over the years, you will catch up and you will kind of maybe go ahead, be better than US in terms of infrastructure. So it's a matter of prioritization as well. And I think same thing goes back to LLMs, our own LLMs as well, right? There's a lot of customer problems to be solved before you want to go deeper and kind of solve an infra problem. I think, and that has been the focus for most of the companies or most of the startups in India. But then obviously sooner or later we will get there. We will get to a point where there is enough resources available, and then you have enough customer problems solved. Now you have to solve the infra problem, and that's where the world is, or as a community we are moving towards.
I personally don't think of them as two separate things, Prateek, because I think the customers, if obviously right now our challenge is as an economy, and especially as a software economy, we're outward looking, right? Most of our demand, most of our revenues come from outside of India.
Right.
As the India story is growing, someday that'll start to change, and we will be inward facing, right? Where the demand actually comes from consumers within. And at that stage, the customer and the infra are aligned from a direction perspective, right? As in what they're asking for. If the customer needs this, the customer is living in India, the customer needs this, they need the LLM to be able to solve for that. And then once that happens is where you're saying the India models will start to pick up.
Yeah, I think it's already happening. I'm not saying it's a event of the future. It's already happening. Right. We are obviously not as or equal footing as US, but India is one of the leading consumer marketplace in the world, right? It's one of the growing economy. It's the biggest growing economy in the world in that sense. So that is already happening. We are going from a software exporter to software consumer. That is already happening to some extent, but it has to be much more fast tracked, and maybe in a couple of years we'll be at a position where our demands are much more than what we are supposed to export to the foreign countries. So yeah, definitely there is a requirement for infrastructure controls coming in. I think from a data center perspective, that has happened. A lot of data centers have started to migrate back into India. I mean, 5 years back, almost all data centers were external. You had to host in US for
even India-based applications,
right? That has happened. So now people have moved their data centers to India and started data residency, those kind of locality kind of things, right? Next step is obviously controls and governance and things, frameworks like that.
Got it. So let's change gears. I mean, I'm going to use the India demand story as a segue into to get into retail. I mean, that's a huge industry in India. You guys are quite immersed in the industry. You work with some of the largest players in retail. What problems are you solving for retail through AI?
So I was actually going to quote, like when you were giving the language example, right? So that is actually one of the search, for instance, is one of the biggest challenge in e-commerce, right? Not because we don't have better technology, but the problem is much more vast here because of the multilingual nature of the consumers. So that is one aspect, and obviously the traditional search is not something which can solve this problem. So
right. Like lasan, like garlic, like kanda, pyaz.
So keywords
onion.
are still one part of it. Like you can still solve for keywords where you can bring in that, I know lasan is garlic is lasan in Hindi.
Yeah, or lesun, depending on,
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But it's even beyond that. So if you look at some of the searches people do, they don't look for keywords. They look for what should I use for my curry, right? They don't even want to call it lesson. They're like, what should I put alongside? And I don't even know the words. It's like very, very
right. So it's
specific,
so the people, right? The way they search, what you're saying is it's not really. Sometimes they can't think of the right terminology and the right word, and they will try to make.
It's more conversational. It's more exploratory. Those kind of aspect, right? And which can't be solved by traditional keyword based search. So that is something which we have solved to some extent, which we are trying to improve on as we go along. And so one aspect is obviously the nature of the search, and another is multilingual side of things, right? How do you enable multilingual for majority of your catalog? Because most of the catalogs are in English because all the systems, e-commerce systems are built based on English, right? How do you solve for multilingual searches and multilingual tagging and things like that?
Are there also visual aspects to how people search? Like if I'm looking for a black shirt, and the catalog's not tagged by color, which there's a lot of noise in the data sometimes, right? For some reason, it may not have the color. It might have the incorrect color listed. Is a lot of that being solved through AI?
Yes. So as the current state of our technology is, like we look at the product images, we look at the text that the product have, like the description and attributes and things like that. We feed that to LLMs, and we kind of understand their embedding level understanding of what exactly it means, and then map it to search, right? So rather than trying to just look at what the data is provided by the e-commerce layer, you go beyond it. You go into what the image means, what the text means. And that's only how you can solve multilingual scenarios, right? You won't have people sitting and tagging that this is black, which is predominantly how things are done around the world today, right? Yeah. You can't do that when you have to do it at India scale and that kind of language understanding. So you need LLMs to come into play and use that multilingual understanding to solve these problems. So that's what we do.
So is that a big company problem, or even if you're a small Shopify store owner, you sell a small number of SKUs, let's say maybe a couple of thousand SKUs, right? Is that problem still relevant to me?
It is definitely, yeah. So see, again, the nature of these businesses, right? Like it's predominantly manual tagging,
right?
Which is not scalable, right? Even so, we've worked with companies which have 10,000 SKUs, for instance, very fairly standard catalog, but they operate in 5 countries across Middle East, for instance, or Southeast Asia, for instance, right? Every country has its own nuances, its own language, different sets of customers coming for different kind of user base, right? There, the challenge kind of exponentially increases,
right?
And you can't manually handle that by going and solving it one by one at a manual level. So that's where you need systems like this, which can come in. You just do one-time catalog upload, and then the rest of it is taken care of by the system.
Got it. So, which of the following scenarios do you think is more likely to play out? Do you think that we will, in the next few years, have a completely new AI native e-commerce vendor that's going to dominate the scene? Or do you think the existing vendors that have the distributions and the supply demand connect, the marketplace connect, will scale up and be more AI friendly, in the sense that right now, if I have to buy a shirt or a shoe, I go in and put my filters. I want to buy a leather shoe. I want to buy a formal shoe, a casual shoe. I want this brand. I want this size. That's how I typically go about my journey. Mm-hmm. But maybe down the line, the AI models are so advanced that they know my size, they know my preference. I just simply say I'm looking for a formal shoe, and they give me the 5 options they think are most likely to fit my needs as well as my preferences.
So a lot of it is already being done, by the way.
Okay.
A lot of marketplaces that you interact with, they are using technologies like this to solve it. Okay. But to your previous question, would the e-commerce players changed into a AI commerce player? I feel they're two different problem statements. So e-commerce as a whole is a different problem statement to be solved, and then discovery, what we call, right, AI discovery as we call it, is a different problem statement to be solved. They don't go hand in hand. I mean, your focus on e-commerce is more towards transactions, managing fulfillment and things like that, versus discovery is more about how you make your users reach the right product in the right time and all. So somebody can solve it, like Amazon obviously solves it at their scale, almost all the e-commerce problems. But from a general software perspective, general stack perspective, you need differentiated players who are solving specific use cases and then doing it really, really well, right? And which can be scaled to thousands of retailers or thousands of commerce players across the world. And that's where I think, let's say we come into some of these use cases that we do. At the same time, let's say the incumbents, right, Shopify, your Magentos and WooCommerce, they are obviously coming up with slight changes to make it AI ready, where they can have plugins or have systems like AI discovery coming in and plugging into Shopify and making it more efficient. And that should be the natural progression of things, where traditional players become more and more open to adopt newer technologies, and then there are people who are solving specifically for stacks like this.
But do you think there's room for a brand new, from the ground up AI search-based e-commerce vendor, especially in some categories like fashion we've been talking about, or maybe in electronics, perhaps there is, somebody needs to pick the right phone. That's a huge problem in India. Getting the right phone in my budget with my needs. I prefer to have a good camera. I prefer to have the right operating system. It's Android and whatever. So based on my preferences.
It definitely is. And I think it's not just a consumer problem. It's also a retailer problem, right? So they are also struggling to ensure that their customers see what inventory they have, right? The discovery aspect of it. So you might be searching for an iPhone, for instance, because you are aware of that brand, but there might be an equivalent option available which you are not even aware of. Now, retailers struggle in terms of how do they make sure that their products are discoverable to their users, right? So that's another aspect of why a new wave of or new engineered search is required. Because it's a very common problem, and almost everyone that we talk to are kind of looking for a solution that solves this today.
So I'll take a slight analogy here, and maybe this is a slight fork in the road. And I was talking to a marketing expert, and they were talking about how LLM SEO, I think there's other terms that people use for it, is now accounting. So LLM searches are now accounting for about 7% of global traffic for in terms of inbound interest that comes to companies. And they're projecting it to be, within a couple of years, projecting that number to increase up to 40%. So 40% of your people are searching on a ChatGPT or a Claude or a Gemini and ending up on your website through that. And it's a completely different ballgame from how traditional SEO and search
Front
engine
end
optimization
ranking.
has been done. Do you think that will make its way into discoverability on even retailers' platforms?
So effectively, it's the same, right? So whether you use a platform like ChatGPT to search for a product and then have this product discoverable to you, versus you use like a brand website and you search there. I mean, the interface is same, which is conversation.
I'd like to push back on that a little bit. So if I use ChatGPT and if I can buy the same product, let's say there's a particular Adidas shoe that I'm looking to buy, right? I can buy it from Adidas's website. I can buy it from Amazon, Flipkart, and 15 other stores. And I want to find which one has the best price. And importantly, which one has the best return policy, which one has the best quality. I know there's history of fakes in some other cases, so I don't want to end up with a pair that's a fake. All of those things might be condensed in a chat GPT, which I might not. If I go directly to Flipkart or to Ajio or to Amazon, I might not have that confidence of, let's say, for example, price, right? Whereas that might be solved if I go into an interface.
Also
like
convenience, right? Like
convenience.
you're getting it, like you spending time in figuring out all those things versus letting ChatGPT solve it for you, or Perplexity or anything for that matter. So definitely that is there. Now, what is required to enable it is what I was alluding to is from a technology perspective, you need a stack which can expose your inventory to these players. Like right now, none of the players are ChatGPT compliant or rather GPT compliant in that sense. To your point of SEO, is a term called GEO. I think.
GEO.
Yeah. So which is trying to make your existing content compliant with these stacks, right? So that's something as a technology you need to go alongside your e-commerce engines, make them available, make them indexable, so that they can be searched and used over ChatGPTs.
Is that something that you help retailers with?
We do, yes, yeah.
Okay.
So by default, I mean, and that's what I was trying to say, right? Like from our perspective, whether the query comes from ChatGPT or it comes from a brand website, it's the same.
Right.
Effectively, you're trying to serve products back to them for the search that has come, right? So we kind of sit as a stack in between your customer, and the customer could be coming from anywhere, and your e-commerce stack. How do we make it conversational? How do we make it searchable in a multilingual ways which is what we solve. Yeah.
And again, as a layman, I might not understand the benefit of improving search on my website. What does that mean? Does that mean better closures? Does it mean better average order value? How is that as a retailer benefiting me if I have fixed search on my website?
Right. So so there are typical metrics that the retailers track, right? So obviously one is your CTRs, like how many products get clicked. There is conversion, like what get clicks, how much of it is bought, right?
Right.
Then there is a matter of discoverability, like how many products are actually being viewed. So you might have inventory of 10,000, but if only 1,000 products are always getting viewed, your 9,000 products are just sitting there as never being searched or never being viewed, right? So then you are in a trouble because those products are kind of losing value in terms of sitting in your warehouses or things like that, right? So inventory churn, inventory turnover is actually another thing that people have to solve for. So a lot of effort has gone into optimizing your CTRs and conversions, but there's a big problem which is making your inventory discoverable, and that's a core search problem. So because search is always tuned to show you most selling product, even if you're giving an exact query which matches to a product which is available, you are more likely to see something which is more sellable. So you are never going to find what you are looking for because you're being fed some other product which is marketed or sponsored and things like that.
I think that's actually a very pertinent problem even from the consumer side. I mean, I go into one of your typical food ordering apps and I get the same restaurants listed to me in the top 5 restaurants every single time. And at one point in time, I want to have that variety, but it's just because somebody's paying to have their restaurant listed at the top. I have to scroll down. Nobody ever bothers to go beyond like the first page or the second page of results, right? So you're stuck with ordering from the same restaurants, even though you crave that diversity of trying different options, right?
Right. And I think that's where the new wave of like ChatGPT driven search and things will come in, because in fact, I was talking to Shobit, who is a co-founder, right, and CTO. So he was saying he was trying to buy some kitchen utensil, which obviously he has no clue about.
Right.
But he was being asked to go search for it.
Right.
And he tried to search on some of the leading like Flipkart and Amazons. And after a few minutes, he just gave up. He went to ChatGPT, wrote a detailed prompt saying, find me this with these features and all of that. It did some research. It came back with the exact product with the link, and he bought from it there. So there's and obviously this is more tech known person who understand how to build prompts and things like that. But that's becoming more and more common knowledge now. Like people are doing these kind of.
That's your typical shopping assistant use case, right?
Yes, that's a shopping assistant use case, which can connect to multiple places and kind of research on what you're actually looking for and then trying to find. So typically what you do as a person, you kind of outsource it to
a GPT.
A GPT to do that for you. Yeah.
Got it. I mean, it's quite interesting that this is seen as a problem on the retail side, because definitely a problem from the consumer side, that I don't get enough options. And if your inventory has 10,000 options, but I'm only seeing 1,000 of them, then that's a problem must be a problem from your perspective as well as my perspective, because I'd like to see more options.
Yes.
Right?
And at scale that becomes much more, right? So if you have marketplaces where there are millions of products, I mean, at max people are interacting with 10,000 or 1 lakh products, and you have like long tail of inventory which is just sitting there, nobody's seeing it.
And that's something that you can solve for your clients.
We do, yeah. So and as I was saying, right, so that's a problem which is already being solved over the last many years. It's getting better and better as we go along. But yeah, different marketplaces are adopting technologies like this to solve that.
Okay, so let's change gears. You also focus heavily in the finance and the fintech industry. My understanding is the most important use cases in fintech for you from an AI perspective are around fraud detection and regulation of fraud, controlling fraud for various banks around the world. What are the core problems that you're solving from your perspective?
So our main focus in fintech is kind of optimize the flow of information in some sense, right? Now, fintech is a lot manual based controls because it pertains to money being a factor, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of controls in terms of manual intervention, manual reviews, manual understanding of documents and things like that. Compliance, fraud example is one other thing, right?
Yeah.
So which we are trying to automate to some extent, or rather make it autonomous to a larger extent. Now, when we do that, so let's say onboarding, for instance, you go apply for a loan somewhere. You have to give 10 documents with your financial history, your KYC, your references from other banks and things like that. If you're a company, it's much more like you have to give your like balance sheets, your
GST
MOA,
details,
AUA, and things like that, right? So, and a lot of human effort goes into just looking at these documents and ensuring that it is clear, and they're not actually going through all the content. They're probably looking at few data points just to see if things are fine, right? So which is completely doable with GPTs now. So that is something which we have done. Which we have completely automated the way you can extract information from any kind of document that is presented, cross-verify it, do validations on it, do fact checks on it using provided APIs behind the scene, connecting to government agencies, getting information from there. So that entire cycle we have done, right? Once you have made it automated, the biggest challenge now is fraud, right? If somebody comes in and try to game the system.
Right.
So that's, and most of the US banks, they have some sense of automated systems for credit approvals and risk management and things like that. The biggest challenge now that they're tackling is fraud. Where people are coming and kind of editing the documents and uploading their. So those kind of aspect is what we are kind of detecting using generative AI. And as an example, I was giving deepfakes, right? People are uploading KYC videos
Right.
generated by deepfakes. So all
Right.
of those things are happening, which we're kind of handling through a fraud detection model.
Right, and you're right. I mean, the advent of and the easy access to these generative AI models has made it a lot simpler for people to create fraud in the first place,
Yes.
to create fraudulent documents and videos and images. And I've seen instances where people have created fraudulent receipts and fraudulent bank statements completely through AI, through models, right? So you need to one up them
Yes.
in terms of detecting whether something whether something is a true copy of its original or if it's been fraudulently created.
Right.
And that's so what I'm hearing is those are some of the models that you've perfected for documents, for KYC, for all of these different use cases to detect fraud at scale.
Yes. So, and as I said, right. So fraud is a recurring phenomena, right? So, and majority of fraud is people who are just trying something small. So it's not that complex always, right? People are probably just changing their name in some other document, or they're, let's say for insurance, they're submitting multiple claims just by changing a date. So they're basic frauds, which kind of covers a lot of volume. Right, and then there are these specialized frauds which keeps coming where people are trying latest technologies to fudge documents or create identity documents and then doing identity fraud and things like that, right? So those are harder to solve. Now, the key here is to kind of being aware of all aspects of these frauds and then being ahead in terms of knowing these bad actors and then being one step ahead than them, right? So that's where we try to kind of innovate and then keep a track of what's happening. And as we work with these banks and institutions, we get the real information from the market, what consumers are trying, and some of them it's post facto, like once the fraud happens, you get that information and then you have to build around it and things like that. Yeah.
Got it. So in terms of your customers and the usage that you're enabling, you're helping a lot of these banks globally catch fraud in document submissions, loan applications, and so on. Are you also helping them leverage information from these documents in different ways?
Yes, yeah. So it's the entire suite, I would say. So basically, in fact, one of the bank we're working in Africa region, they are trying to build a branch assistant, basically. So instead of having a human as a teller at a branch, they're trying to replace with a system which can do everything when you
Interact
go to
with the customers?
Interact with the customers, collect their documents, help them, guide them. Obviously, while in the process, you are ensuring that the information provided is correct and all of that. But so there are different aspects. It's one of the customer in Middle East. They enabled IPO subscription through WhatsApp.
No.
Right. So those kind of aspects are also there. So it's different ways of kind of reaching your customer, while we kind of empower the back end of it in terms of understanding customer, understanding their use cases, understanding the documents, extracting information from it, verifying it, validating it, and so on.
And also the industry expertise, the general know-how of the fintech space, the fact that you worked with banks for all this while, you have investments in companies that, for example, play in the space for a number of years. So that domain expertise is just as important as the AI expertise.
Definitely,
knowing the regulatory landscape, knowing what is permissible and what goes beyond. I mean, some of these frauds are just like, if you look at the whole Jane Street scandal that it's been in the news the last few days, I mean, that's also, it's a kind of fraud. It's a huge scale. It's not similar to what you described with the small, document fraud here and there at individual level. It's a massive scale.
Market manipulation.
Yeah, it's a market manipulation, right? But those things can also, assuming we have the right access levels, or assuming the AI systems are deployed by the right parties, stakeholders involved, things like that can be prevented, and they can be easily picked up by AI agents, right?
Definitely, yeah. So especially lot of banking fraud, especially, they happen or they are done by people who understand those systems, right? So that's the first. very rarely it happens that somebody external comes in and kind of runs it. So similar for Jane Street, they are a major player in the market. They have been doing this, I think, they have presence across the world and whatnot. So when there's a human angle, obviously it's difficult to prevent it because somebody obviously would know that this is happening, right? And they didn't do anything about it. Versus when you have agents or you have autonomous AI coming in and kind of monitoring such things, you have better compliance because the control is not left to human interpretation. It's following the framework to the core.
The T.
Yeah. So that's the aspect which can prevent such instances. You're kind of taking the human angle away from such things. But at the same time, having access to information much quickly solves a lot of problem, right? So this was happening for last 1.5 years or 2 years.
Yeah.
This is now SEBI has got to figuring it out that something like this was happening.
Right.
Primarily because their speed of understanding the data, the speed of analyzing it is much slower because they have to deal with so much at a time, and majorly humanly, right? Somebody has to sit and kind of understand all of it and come to it. And that's where AI plays a big role because you can automate a lot of low risk functions, while the human functions are more towards looking at advanced problems and difficult situations. So that is something definitely that can be used for fast tracking compliance into these organizations.
Yeah, and it's actually, you mentioned Aadhaar and UPI. I actually agree. I think our banking systems are some of the best in the world. I mean, people take this for granted, but it's not easy to create banking systems for such a wide demographic and a huge population, right? So you and I, we both experienced banking around the world. I think Indian banks are some of the best in the world in terms of how they're tackling customer problems.
In terms of regulation as well, yeah. So and technology-wise as well. So most of, US is at certain pedigree, I would say, and then rest of the world actually looks up to India to guide like how banking should be done, what kind of technology should be used, what kind of regulation should be used. So that's actually pretty standard. A lot of African countries, Middle Eastern countries, they look up to India to kind of drive those things. So, yes.
Yeah. And that's where we can be the trailblazers and the path setters for a lot of the world to follow. And some of the AI work that we're doing now, that you are doing with your company, can actually inform how the rest of the world catches up or the rest of the world sort of emulates.
Right. So it's again, it goes hand in hand. Like you obviously have to work with the bankers. We have to work with the regulators. So one of the use case we were working on was something similar to wallets in India, right? Like Paytms of the world. It requires a regulatory approval of central banks, right? So there were use cases where, like, we're working in an African country. They were not that comfortable with. So we had to go educate them how things are, how this will play out, what kind of controls are in place, what kind of risk controls are in place, and so on. And then we got that approval. So those kind of aspects are also there. It's not just a technology solution. You have to understand the landscape. You have to understand how banking as a practice is done as well. So that's an important aspect of building in this space.
And what is interesting to me is when we see the development of both India and China over the last 20 years or so, right? In many ways, they're leapfrogging their Western counterparts for things that are done more recently. You have a chance to do it a lot better because for banking systems in America, they've been in place for hundreds of years now. Whereas, and India also had its banking systems, but when I remember, centralized banking is something that came in our lifetimes to India, right? And we've been able to bring in and stack on technology at a much rapid rate. You look at the same story with electrification of cars in China. It's just leapfrogged the West and just overall technology adoption. If you look at the next frontier, which by many accounts is countries like India, countries in Africa, countries in South America, Brazil, and countries like Indonesia. I mean, that's the next frontier of where the development's sort of coming from, where these are the economies that are growing rapidly. there is a good chance that they might leapfrog the West in terms of
Mm-hmm.
systems like banking, systems like fintech, right? So that's where the true frontier of innovation really is, rather than the Europes, the UKs, and the Americas of the world.
Yes, I think banking is a fantastic sector in terms of technology adoption. They've always adopted the latest and greatest very quickly, and India being one of them to lead a lot of factors, right? So yeah, definitely, I think people. I mean, some of the solutions that we're working on has a potential of kind of becoming widespread, used across the world, and solve some of these core problems.
Okay. Well, I think on that note, we'll try to land this plane. Anything that you want to say to the viewers? Anything that you want to leave us with? You are, in my minds at least, one of the most knowledgeable people about AI. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, so I would say that for consumers, for companies, and alike, right? I think AI is here to stay. People are now fairly aware of it. There's some bit of people are scared that it will take away jobs. It will do certain things which humans were used to do and all that. So it's similar to how when computers were there, when industrial revolution happened before that, there was always that resistance of adopting newer technology. But obviously those have made humans more productive, more, and have them focus on bigger problems, right? So, and that's where AI is today. I think people are adopting it, they're using it to solve problems which are not solvable before, and so on, right? So that will always be the case. Now, obviously, we have to do it in a way which is more moral, which is kind of benefiting society in some way, have a governance framework in place so that it can't be abused, it can't be misused by bad actors. So those are some of the aspects that people have to start thinking about and start adopting products which solve such problems. While the core technology can always, like, there should be adopted more and more, and again, the human creativity is required to kind of come up with problems which are not even thought of, right? Like AI can't think of problems to solve. It can probably solve a problem in an efficient way, but you still have to kind of direct it towards human problems which only humans understand. And that's where I think human creativity is required, which everybody should be focusing on, in my opinion.
Well, thank you so much, Prateek. Thank you for your time. Thank you for organizing this and for giving us your thoughts. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you so much for hosting me, and we had a really great time. I think this was one of the first podcasts I did, so it's really fun.
Awesome. We look forward to doing more.
Definitely. Thank you.